it's a complicated procedure that we're trying to make as simple as possible for the non-financially minded entrepreneur.
Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel Petitpoff. I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. I'm excited today to be joined by an old friend, Colin Hewitt, who's the CEO and founder at Float, which is a platform that helps businesses all over the world improve and see their cash flow far out into the future. So we're excited today to dive into cash flow, something that we don't talk a lot about at Parakeeto, but is critically important because at the end of the day, if you run out of cash, your business dies. So with all of that, Colin, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Marcel, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure. We were just talking before the show about AI, being a SaaS founder right now, pretty wild. Times are crazy, and I'm sure we'll get into that in the episode. But I do want to make sure that we dive into the topic du jour because no matter what's happening with AI, cash flow is still more important. Because without it, it is literally the lifeblood of your business. So let's start with a little backstory. What made you want to start Float and solve this cash flow visibility problem?
Yeah, so I was actually running an agency and our finances were a mess. And I realized that it was a bottleneck and I was the bottleneck and I was doing stuff in a spreadsheet. And I'd kind of got my spreadsheet into a pretty good place, but I just couldn't help thinking like there's so much manual work. And once we started using cloud accounting software like Xero, we were just like, this has got to be automated. And so we thought this will be easy, having no real financial experience or background other than running the business. And yeah, here we are 14 years on, still trying to make it work well. And I'd still, I think we've cracked the core of it, but it just feels like we're still just getting started.
So this is an interesting problem space. And, what you've done in this space is you've really specialized and you've put a big emphasis on service-based businesses, agencies. What is unique about the challenge of modeling cash flow for that type of business that you've really had to wrap your arms around to be the best at it?
Yeah, so initially, a lot of forecasting is taught on this what's called the indirect method of cash flow. So you start with a P&L and then you derive the cash flow out of that. And so for me, anytime I saw that, I was like, it's so out of date immediately as soon as it's done. What I was looking for, which I didn't even know at the time was called, was the direct method of cash flow, where and the direct method is interesting because technically the direct method will just look at like what's invoiced and billed, so what's sitting there ready to come out. But actually we wanted to find a hybrid because there's a lot of things that we hadn't been invoiced for or bills that we hadn't received that we needed to factor in. So all of a sudden it's this back to this three-way dynamic where you've got something that I've got a bill sitting in my accounting software that's due to go out, but I've also got a budget that I've set that may be higher or lower. So really what we're trying to figure out across multiple line items in your budget is like, which ones are overdue, underdue, how much do I take the remaining of? And, can we get that as accurate to the day rather than just January's cash flow is this at the beginning of the month and this at the end of the month? Like what happens in between? I've got my payroll to go out, at some point in the month. I need to know exactly like what dates there are, what bank accounts we're using. Maybe I want to plan a couple of scenarios. Maybe I want to explore different expected payment dates if I push certain things back and understand what happens. So it's very dynamic rather than this spreadsheet, which doesn't really have the detail. And then we get into things like, well, I might want to understand, like, why is that figure what it is? So then you're actually drilling into the transactions that have already happened without having to go back to the accounting software or the bank and seeing what is what. Why is this figure telling me what it is. Maybe there's stuff in there that I hadn't, bank transactions that I didn't even know had gone out. So it's kind of turned into this cash management platform that to really get an accurate forecast, there's tons of stuff that you need to do in order to be to get it to the point where you can rely on it to make decisions. And that's always been our North Star, is like, how do we get this thing so when you look at it, you know exactly where your cash is, what's coming out tomorrow, the end of the week, the end of the month, and you can also validate it by not just looking, not like you could do with a spreadsheet where you just think, well, I'm not sure where these figures are coming from. You can actually drill right into the bank transactions and understand maybe like things that you didn't know, like we're still paying for that subscription, or, you know, that's why we're over budget multiple times. We've been invoiced twice by this one company. So it gives you that level of forensics that a lot of people are not going to go looking for in their bank account or their accounting software. So that's kind of a long way of saying, like, it's a complicated procedure that we're trying to make as simple as possible for the non-financially minded entrepreneur.
Yeah. You've highlighted a lot of the, it's funny. I say this all the time. People love to talk about how easy it is to start a service-based business. What they often leave out is how hard it is to scale. And you've touched on a lot of the reasons that that's true, right? It's like, we run SaaS companies, and cash flow forecasting is relatively easy for that business model. I mean, you know exactly when the money's coming in. You look at your subscriptions, like it's really not that complicated. But you look at an agency and it's like, well, we got a retainer over here and we got a project over here that has different milestone-based payments. But if the timeline gets pushed around, then like the payments might move around. Or if the client decides they don't want to improve the thing, then we might not get our money. And then we have this other thing over here that's kind of a time and materials model. And so we don't really know how much we're going to bill until after we've already done the work. And then we invoice it, and then that has payment terms on it. And so like very, very quickly, just the money coming inside of things can become very, very complex to model, all these different edge cases. And then you have this this nuance of, you're looking at cash, which is critically important. You got to make sure you don't run out of cash. And that could be radically different than the accrual lens on the business, which they might be, also needing to look at it. And the understanding that those things need to be separate and they tell a different story can also be a little overwhelming or be a little over people's heads.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people then end up just outsourcing it directly. So they feel like that's that other person's job, and they're not able to engage in it. And we wanted to make this like I guess where we're heading now is that making it like a team sport. So, I can go in and see like when the last budget was updated. I can comment on an invoice and go, hey, maybe we shouldn't pay this until the work's delivered, or maybe we should hold off on, maybe we should chase that bill. Where are we at with that? And it becomes like a much more of a team project management rather than just something that sits with one person in the finance department, and then people get a shock like at the end of the month when they're like, where's all the cash gone?
Yeah. And I mean, I find, to your point, when it's outsourced, there's a couple of issues that arise. Number one, if it is fairly nuanced and complex, it's rare that the lines of communication are efficient enough that that person is able to get all the context that they need to like really accurately and precisely model cash flow. And so you end up in this dichotomy where it's like, you have to communicate so much context all the time that it's like you might as well just be doing it yourself. Like you don't get a lot of leverage from having somebody else do it, or you don't communicate that context and then you have a massive regression in accuracy of the cash flow forecast. And then the other thing that often we see happen is like there's just a lack of understanding because the business owner is not in touch with the underlying assumptions that went into the cash flow forecast, or because they don't really understand the difference between the cash and accrual lens on the business. They often walk away from that conversation with their accounting partner at the end of the month feeling more confused than clear on what's going on. Or it just takes so much effort and so much Q&A, to your point, to drill down and understand like how do we get here, and it could just be really quite arduous and sort of defeats the whole purpose of this exercise, really, besides catastrophic failures, avoiding those and seeing those into the future.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the vision is just to have a single pane of glass that you can look at and you can immediately understand, like, here's where my cash is at. And some people will say, oh, well, you don't have all the balance sheet items, or you don't have, but like most of the stuff, like we'll have all the bank accounts, you can put in a lot of stuff, like even if you've got director's loans or stuff that's coming out. You can set those up as budgets, so you can get a lot of the information into. I think what people don't always understand is there's a statement called the statement of cash flows, which only has a certain amount of information. But once you're actually building a cash forecast, you can pull in a lot of stuff that's maybe on the balance sheet that you want to add in there. So basically it's very easy to get. That it's the one place where I think if I was looking at a business, like acquiring a business, or I wanted to understand how a business is doing, just show me the cash flow, show me how it's been performing. Like you can massage a P&L sometimes or on a balance sheet, and you can do some clever accounting, but the cash really starts to just give you a very clear idea, in my opinion. And it's the first thing that a business owner should be looking at, not to get any nasty surprises.
So one of the things that you've probably had to wrestle with a lot building Float is this tension between precision and accuracy, where, especially where you're connecting directly to the accounting software, you can make the cash flow forecast infinitely precise, laddering up from all these little tiny minor transactions, but that creates a tension wherein it just takes way more time and effort to update it, to run different scenarios, to change things, right? It's like, oh, I want to update this thing, but I've broken this account down into like 15 different buckets. So now I have 15 clicks to make to run this new scenario. And so this is a tension that exists all over the place in project management and time tracking. We see it all the time. How do you think about managing that tension and sort of guiding clients and having the product guide clients towards the right intersection of precision that doesn't end up ultimately degrading accuracy because it becomes too much work to actually maintain the forecast itself?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and something that we've wrestled with a lot. Some people in the past have said to us, just give us a rough idea that we know is broadly like going in the right direction. The problem with that is that you look at it, and if it's not accurate, then it's hard to know what you've missed. You could be a little bit out. So we've kind of landed on the thing that we're the most accurate. And, actually when you're pulling in, we can pull in the transactional level without, so you can basically, the accuracy comes down to how you want to set your budgets. So you can set your budgets at a group level, be quite generic about it. But when it comes to the historical months, we'll be dead accurate. So we've got everything, right down to if your books are in order and they're reconciled correctly, then we'll be on the penny. So it's really, it's really a case of, you need to set it up where people can choose how accurate they want to make the budgeting level. But in terms of the transaction level, we pull in quite a lot of detail. So I think we've got a really nice balance between, you might not want to create, a budget for every employee. You could just create a payroll budget and say it's this, or you might not want to create every single line item for every single marketing cost. You can, but you may just want to create a generic budget and lump a lot of that stuff in together. So it's really down to the individual person and what they want to do.
Makes a lot of sense. Very consistent with like how we would typically think about this, which is like a little bit of deliberate separation from how the accounting tool is set up, which is like infinitely precise, versus like how you think about forecasting into the future. So to your point, somebody can maintain a very simple, sort of very rudimentary forecast that they know they can maintain, but it doesn't necessarily gate them from reconciling all this very precise historical data to that schema, as long as there's mapping. That's really a smart way to approach it.
What we have stayed away from is that we didn't want there to be, like when I look at my accounting software, like I have to do a certain amount of reconciliation work. I have to say this invoice was for that payment. What we didn't want to create was a system where you have to do that again in Float. Like that was just too much work. So we made the decision to take a lot of our data. So all our budgets are mapped to the accounting categories that are set up in your in Float. So it's on your accounting software. So basically it's all about giving the user control, but not giving them extra work to do. So like ideally they'll come in and it just is accurate.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about cash flow strategy, right? Zooming out from the question of, how do you forecast your cash flow, and into more of a conversation about like, what do you do if your cash flow is just like not going to be good? How do you think about that? And what are some of your strategies for making sure that cash flow is healthy and improving your situation if you're looking into the future and you're thinking, ooh, things are going to be pretty tight?
Yeah. So again, we don't see ourselves as a solution for businesses that are always in cash flow crisis. Like, what's nice is to run this thing almost like a, virus checker in the background. So it's just there, and you kind of check in with it when in the good times. In the bad times, then you can come in when you need to, and all your budgets are set up. Your bank, if your bookkeeping's done on a regular basis, it's all good to go. You basically can see it immediately. So that's the first thing, is like having something that's in place. But then when you get into those moments, it's looking at, where can I push back and where can I speed up getting payments in. So you've got a list of all the invoices that are due. You can see that exact thing there, and then you can you can go and do a little bit of chasing. We've actually just introduced an invoice finance partner in the UK, which we're thinking about potentially rolling out more internationally. But the idea is that some selective invoice finance is a great option for people if they're like, I could really do with getting this invoice paid today versus 30 days at a very affordable price. So that's something we've introduced as a system that helps people. But really, then it's about looking at your costs and thinking like, where can I push? What can I, what's excessive? And it's amazing sometimes just seeing the difference between pushing a few things around that can smooth out. Like, you're really looking at like, when does the cash drop below a threshold, which is going to make payments start bouncing, or are we on a trajectory that's really, really not pleasant, and we're going to have to look at a bigger cash injection, like a loan or an overdraft or something like that, or line of credit. So it's really down to, is this just a temporary blip, like I need cash for a few days, or is it something that's sort of more systemic and we're going to need like more time to course correct? But once you've got that visibility, it's actually really, it's easy to panic in your head, and it's easy to kind of think like, I don't have time to build this model out accurately or engage a fractional CFO. So it's actually really important to have that information there ready to go when you need it.
Do you want some free resources to help you measure and improve your profitability? If you do, then I want to tell you about our agency profitability toolkit, which you can grab absolutely free in the show notes or by heading to parakeeto.com/toolkit. It's packed with training videos, cheat sheets, templates, and all kinds of other great resources to help you start measuring and improving the essential metrics that are going to drive better profitability in your business. And it's helped thousands of other agencies around the world do the same. So I want to encourage you to go and grab a copy of that. And if you'd rather get in the fast lane and just have our team of experts guide you through the process of measuring and improving your profitability, then I want to encourage you to apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. And with that, I want to thank you again for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll let you get back to it. Yeah, I totally agree. I've unfortunately, not in Parakeeto, but in some other businesses that I am involved in, have had to have some pretty alarming cash flow conversations and run that scenario, right? Of like, okay, if we don't, let's start moving stuff around and try to figure out how to get through this. And the ability to model it out is critical. And to your point, it's amazing how much a few tweaks can make a difference. So on this note, this is a shameless plug, but if you're listening and you want to take a very, very deep dive into like all of the strategies that you can use to pull cash forward or defer expenses, which includes everything that Colin just spoke about, including invoice factoring or invoice financing. We did a deep dive on this on the podcast a little while ago, and so I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. It talks about profitability and cash flow, how to think about those differently, and how to improve each of them independently, because they're different. They're related, but they're different. All right, with that, we got to talk about AI. Because you've been running a software company for quite some time, and now we're in this moment where it just feels like the pace is changing, even though it's been going very fast. It's like it's finding a new gear, and I feel that we are at a moment where a lot of the stuff that used to be hard about cash flow forecasting, for example, or forecasting capacity or managing projects, it's about to get a lot easier because there will be an employee that never eats or sleeps and doesn't care about how boring the work is that will be doing a lot of the minutia on our behalf. And I'm just really curious, like what your perspective is on where things are headed for not just software companies, but like the agencies that are using products like yours.
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge question. And I think I do feel for, I often say it's a crazy time to be building software because, the grind is just shifting, on a weekly basis. And it's, I think it's also a really exciting time to be building software. Like personally, I haven't written a line of code ever in the Float code base. It's not something that was my background. I was a computer science grad, and I get coding, like I have coded, but I knew it wasn't like what I hated about coding was the detail. Looking for like editing your code, looking for semicolons, just the precision that wasn't really my thing. Now I'm able to go into like Claude Code and just make stuff, like build applications, and like I haven't had to relearn like a load of like stuff that's happened over the last decade and how things are done differently. I can just ask it, like, tell me about this. Why should I do this? What is TypeScript? Like, why do we need to do this? It's just the learning capacity for humans is crazy. So it's actually, for me, it's a really fun time to be building. And also things that, like, as a software company that we, would have just put on the backlog because it was just too long. Like, now we're able to think about, like, I was like, how we build a Google Sheets integration with Float so we could, like, can I just mock that up? And I was able to go and build it in like under a day. Get it working as a prototype, and then submit it to the product team and say, hey, what do you think? The next stage for that would be me actually doing like a pull request, so they're able to actually start to see some of that code and start getting it into the actual product live. But in terms of like what people are starting to be able to do, I think that's an exciting time, and it's an exciting time for agencies because, again, I used to run an agency and we had limitations in the types of developers we had. Our developers were very used to, like, they were shallow in terms of their ability. They knew CRM software. They had a limited experience in what they could build, but now they're able to get the thinking of like really like dyed-in-the-wool engineers that built software applications. And so the things that agencies are going to be able to build for their clients, again, I think that's a really exciting opportunity. But to the point of SaaS, and where, like, how do you have a moat when people can actually come in and start to try and eat your lunch essentially and build a software that I can't remember what it was. Oh, it was some kind of content, like AI content software. Again, like, that's just, people don't need to pay for that anymore. It's just default out of the box in other solutions. So yeah, I think we have to be trying to think one step ahead. We have to think, where's this going? And I think the reality is, for us, one of the things is that, we have to target, it's going to be really hard to target the small end of the market because it's price sensitive. People are always looking to save money. So if they can save $50 a month by building something that works for them, a lot of the time they might think it's worth the effort. And I think, but when you start working with larger companies, you think about the things that are harder to copy. So it's not just, there's a guy who's blogger we call Unpromptable, and I think you always have to think, like, if can my software be just a prompt, like, build me a cash flow forecast. Here's this sort of couple of MCP connectors, and away you go. And actually, yeah, maybe you get a forecast out of that, but like all the stuff around, like, can I trust it? Does it look right? Can I drill into it? Can I, comment with my peers? Can I see an audit trail of who changed what? Like that sort of software that takes a lot longer to maintain and build. I think that's when companies start going, do we want to do this? Do we want to be like constantly having to work on this, and what if the person leaves the company? Like, we're back to, maybe companies will put up with that, but I think on the enterprise level or the mid-market are maybe going to say, like, well, we're happy just to keep paying for people who want to build this really well and do a really good job. So we've just got to make sure we stay on the right side of that. And I guess time will tell whether that plays out or not, or whether people just, everybody's building their own software, is that a year away? Is it 3 or 4 years away?
It's interesting because, I'm using Claude Code a whole bunch too and playing with it, and it's boggling my mind. Like, I'm a total peon. The closest thing to code I've ever written is like a nested if statement in an Excel sheet. You know what I mean? And I'm deploying production software. It's crazy. That should not be possible, but it is. And I'm building complex stuff. Like, it's not simple. But where I get actually most excited, and where I think, at least in the near term, the largest swath of adoption is going to be, is using things like Claude Code. But of course, it won't be Claude Code. It will be an interface that is even more conversational and even more agentic to do things that are not coding per se. We'll take a step back. Like, if you really think about it, if I go into Float and I move the deadline or I move the date on an invoice, I've just coded something, right? Like, what happens on the back end is you have code that executes rendering an updated forecast as a result of that. The language that I'm using, though, is an interface. I don't need to know how the code works. I don't need to tell Float how to execute code, but I am interacting with code. And I think what tools like Claude Code and Cowork and the next version of these things that are coming out do is they sort of abstract all of that stuff away. And in some ways, you sort of realize just how much everything just runs on code. And what it starts to do is it starts to write and execute code to do things on your behalf. And so there's a future that I believe is very, very close, where I'm not having to use software a whole lot anymore. And I'm actually really excited about that, where it's like my MCP connection to Float allows me to chat with an agent every morning that pings me and says, hey, what's up? By the way, this client just emailed and said they're not going to be able to make a payment on the invoice. So I updated that in Float. And do you have any other updates for me? And I go, oh yeah, I think we're going to miss the deadline on this project. So, make sure you update the invoice schedule accordingly. And we're going to have this other project that comes through tomorrow, and we're going to have to pay the deposit on it. And it goes, cool, no problem. I'll update the Float forecast. Let me know if you want me to send you, some numbers. And then every Friday it sends you a report. But I'm not having to log in to all of these different tools that I'm using that do this stuff for me. And the same will be true about project management. It'll be fully conversational. It'll go out and talk to my team and update things on my behalf. And I won't have to interact with the user interface to execute the code. The code will speak, the coders will speak to one another, and this whole layer of user interface will sort of become abstracted. And then I think the amount of complexity that we can handle will increase significantly, because those computers don't care how boring it is to update 500 tasks in the project management tool in order to get the forecast right. They have a much higher tolerance, and they'll be able to do it a lot faster. And so I think that's just going to get super, super interesting. And the leverage for so many small business owners and so many employees inside of teams is not going to be building their own software necessarily, but in a way, building scripts that just do the things that they used to do manually, or do the things that they used to have to remember how to do in a way that they don't have to remember it anymore.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the world is changing so fast. And I think we are, some people they're moving, the world is dividing into two camps. One is that I don't really want to, I'm putting my head in the sand, and the other is embracing it, consuming it all. And I think both of those extremes can be dangerous, because again, I think as humans, we have to think about, I read a good article that somebody was saying, in San Francisco, it's strange to be, he was comparing San Francisco to Paris, and saying in Paris, you go out for dinner and that's it. You're just out for dinner. People then go home and go to bed. Whereas in San Francisco, people are going back and they're checking in on their agents that have been spinning up code for the last 5 hours while you've been at dinner, and then they're interacting with that, and then they're going to sleep. And like, I've tried that, and I find like it kind of like the capacity to have like engineers that are just sort of, the thought of having an engineer like is just sitting there waiting for you to go, yep, that's a good thing. Like, let's go ahead with this. Let's push the button. Versus like, like I could just, if I wake up at night, maybe I'll just go in and make sure that my agent isn't stuck and like can crack on and do another 3 or 4 hours of work. It's like, I've tried to kind of recklessly enable all permissions on Claude Code, and it does help, but it's still, it didn't just get permission. It still gets to the point where it's back asking for input. And I think again, like, that's, people are going to work, like OpenClaw kind of was working on that to try and just make it like, just keep going until you have something that's actually really good. And there's other products that do that. But yeah, it is, I think the way I think about it is, we're going to have C3PO in our home. We're going to have something that we can talk to and engage. The problem is, like, how do we know what to focus on? Because when you can do so much all of a sudden, like I had an example the other day where I was set aside time to think about like some of our positioning in the market. We're trying to move a little bit more mid-market. And I wanted to consider where we sit in relation to some other products in the market and cash management, treasury management. And I had a bunch of research, and I uploaded it all, and I got like a really, really good like report on like just the whole thing. And I was like, oh, now what I do, like I still have to spend time thinking and considering, and the temptation is just to keep going. But at some point you've got to stop and actually make decisions and engage and think about it. So yes, I think some of that stuff is like going away. Like, imagine a really efficient multiple EAs, fantastic, but that doesn't always solve the problem. People are going to build a lot of apps, and a lot of times software that just becomes bloated because you can build so much and keep going. Like, nobody wants the Microsoft Word. They like the sort of simple, like, we've taken time to create this and build this right. So I think I think we're going to see a lot of over-engineered solutions. We're going to see a lot of like AI slop, and yeah, like maybe we're going to be looking for the artisan crafted stuff. I don't know.
It's certainly going to be interesting, and I think you've raised a couple of interesting just thoughts about, for the humans listening to this, where are we headed and how do we think about that? And it's like, yeah, increasingly you'll just spend all your time thinking instead of doing. And if you're not used to thinking instead of doing, then like that might be an adjustment. And to your point, it's like when every problem can be solved, the problem becomes knowing what problem to solve and in what order. And sequencing has always been the biggest challenge, but we were able to be distracted from that because we spend so much time in execution. But like, it's all going to zero, to your point. And I'm already like, this remote control feature that just got released, like, it's a problem. I'm in the bathroom at dinner checking on my agent. You know what I mean? Well, I used to check social media. Now I'm in Claude Code. It's like, so you can type a command into Claude Code during your session /remote-control, and the QR code comes up. You scan it with your phone, and you can continue the session on your phone remotely as long as your computer is still open. So like, bro, it's bad. And I'm like, I am super addicted to Claude Code. I'm like up past my bedtime, 2 terminals open, vibe coding 2 different apps at the same time, dangerously skip permissions. Like, it is very addictive once you really like break into it and figure out what it can do. It's wild. So I'm with you on that. And I have my quality of sleep. If I looked at my Whoop stat, like since I started using Claude Code, I'm certain my sleep has been worse.
Yeah, I feel the same. And there's a part of me that's like, I'm learning, I'm getting back into it. This is good. Like, I mean, in the early days of building Float, like my co-founder, Phil, would have been like working into the night. He just get into the zone and he would love it. Like there's something nice about being in flow and just like working on a problem and nailing it and sorting it out. But I find myself, I brought my laptop over. I was watching TV and I was supposed to be relaxing. And I find myself glancing over doing that thing. Like you keep going. And then I was like, oh, why don't we build this feature? And why don't we try this? And you just, if you've got one of those kind of curious minds, it can be dangerous because you just think, well, let's keep going. But I think the challenge is, like you say, like productivity in itself is not always the end goal. And, it's going to be interesting to think like, yeah, this is a very interesting time in history. Like it's a great opportunity to get ahead of the curve, but we also got to think about sustainability, like our mental health, our physical health, and well-being, in terms of like, where do I put the boundaries to try and make this more manageable. So it's actually giving me back time to think rather than just consuming all my time to do even more.
Yeah. Yeah. And it kind of speaks to this concept I think about a lot, which is like speed versus velocity. And then speed is just like how fast you can go in any given direction, but velocity is the speed that you move in a particular direction. And I think it can be very easy for this to manifest into like you're just like going very, very fast in all the wrong directions. And the discernment becomes so critically important. But I feel like if you can combine having a lot of clarity on where you're going and what problems you're solving and like what's important, and convey that to a team of people, it's really exciting to think about what you can accomplish with a small team right now with where all of this is going. So I'm sure we could keep talking about this forever, but you've got places to be. Yeah. So for those that are listening, they want to learn more about Float, they want to follow you and the content that you produce, where should we send them in the show notes?
Yeah, floatapp.com.
Easy. Floatapp.com. It'll be in the show notes along with that cash flow podcast that I mentioned. With that, Colin, great to see you again, man. And thank you for making the time to be on the show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, great to chat, Marcel. Looking forward to keeping up with how things are going on that. And maybe we can, check in again.
Sounds great, man. All right. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. And we'll see you on the next episode.